have facts to support that. Nothing in the facts tell us that this guy was shooting his rifle outside of his front door because he intended to kill anyone. So we know that any answer that has to do with intent is incorrect. A is incorrect. Let's go to answer choice C, that the evidence is insufficient because the shooter did not know that the driver was driving by his house, and therefore he could not have acted intentionally. Now, this answer is incorrect because the shooter did not have to know that the driver was driving by his house. And it doesn't matter whether he acted intentionally or not, because we've already established that for a finding of murder or second degree murder, so just for all intents and purposes, murder and second degree murder are the same thing. If you see murder, it's second degree murder. If you see second degree murder, it's second degree murder. First degree murder will always say first degree murder. So if you don't see first degree murder, assume that it's second degree murder. And answer choice C is wrong because, again, he didn't have to know that a driver was driving by the house because he didn't have to have the intent to kill anyone. That's not required for second degree murder. Number 4, that the evidence is insufficient because at most the shooter's conduct constituted gross negligence and involuntary manslaughter. Well, that answer is incorrect because the shooter's conduct, it may appear to have constituted gross negligence, but this conduct is more along the lines of recklessness. So once again, we go back to our mindsets from the model penal code, and it says under the model penal code definitions for negligence that a person acts negligently with respect to a material element of an offense when he should be aware of a substantial and unjustifiable risk that the material element exists or will result from his conduct. That is what the model penal code says for negligence, but let's hear what it says for recklessness. A person acts recklessly with respect to a material element of an offense when he consciously disregards a substantial and unjustifiable risk that the material element exists or will result from his conduct. So the difference is negligence says that you should be aware of a substantial and unjustifiable risk, which is true here. He should have been aware that if he shot the gun out of his door, that the bullet may have struck a driver that was driving by, because there's obviously a street outside of his door. And what happens on streets? People drive on streets. So he should have known that by doing that, he could have injured someone. But when we look at recklessness under the model penal code definitions, it says a person acts recklessly with respect to a material element of an offense when he consciously disregards a substantial and unjustifiable risk. That is more of what we're seeing here. And it is more along the lines with our answer choice of malice aforethought. This guy lives in this house. He knows that people drive past his house, yet he still decided to shoot this gun outside the door. So what he did was he consciously disregarded this substantial and unjustifiable risk that he could shoot someone, and he proceeded to shoot this gun anyway. This was done with malice aforethought, the unlawful killing of another human being with malice aforethought, which means recklessness, wanton conduct. We just saw this in the problem above. Negligence does not rise to the level of malice aforethought. There must be some kind of deliberate act in order to constitute malice aforethought. And if the act is deliberate, then it cannot be negligent. Those two are mutually exclusive. They don't mean the same thing. So again, your job here is to choose the best answer. And the best answer is answer choice B. This satisfies the elements for a finding of murder, which is the unlawful killing of another human being with malice aforethought, which is evidenced by recklessness, wantonness. That is what we have here. So that is why the answer choice is B, and why it's not D, and why intent, which is what you see in answers A and C, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that he didn't have the intent, because that's not required for a finding of second-degree murder. Question number 13. A patient suffering from a life-threatening blood disorder could be saved only by undergoing a new treatment performed by a physician in another city. It was therefore arranged that the patient would fly to the city where the physician would perform the treatment. The day before the patient was to leave, his sole heir, who stood to inherit from him, poisoned him. The poison produced a reaction that required postponement of the journey. Meanwhile, the plane on which the patient was to have flown crashed and all aboard were killed. The next day, the patient died from the combined effects of the poison and the blood disorder. His heir was arrested and charged with criminal homicide. The heir should be found not guilty because the poison was not the sole cause of death. Well, we know that that's not correct, because although we have here that he died from the poison and he died from the combined effects of the poison and the blood disorder. So what we have here is we have a combined situation, the poison and the blood disorder. The blood disorder, something that he had naturally, or for all we know, it could have been induced or worsened by the poison that he ingested. We don't know, but we do know that the poison had something to do with his death. So not guilty would not be the proper answer, because whether or not the poison was the sole cause of the death, it was a cause of the death. And to poison someone is a crime. So not guilty is not the correct answer. Then we have not guilty because the patient would have died anyway if the heir had not poisoned him. And by that they mean even if he had went on the plane, he would have died because the plane crashed and all aboard were killed. It doesn't matter that he would have died anyway if he had went on the plane. That has nothing to do with the heir. It has to do with the fact that the heir did something. He performed an act, actus reus, which resulted in the patient's death. So again, that answer is incorrect. Not guilty because the heir's actions resulted only in postponing the patient's death by 1 day. That answer is incorrect. The correct answer choice is guilty. The heir should be found guilty because we have here mens rea, we have actus reus, and we have concurrence, and we know that the patient died from the combined effects of the poison and the blood disorder. But for the administration of the poison, perhaps the patient would not have died because he would have only had the blood disorder. But here it clearly tells us that he died from the combined effects of the poison and the blood disorder. The poison was administered by the heir, therefore the heir can be found guilty and charged with criminal homicide. Question number 14. The defendant, angered because a rival gang member had twice beaten him up after school, obtained a heavy lead pipe and waited in a deserted alleyway, which he knew the rival took as a route home every day after school. When his enemy came walking down the alley, the defendant leapt out behind him and smashed the pipe into the victim's head, knocking him to the ground. The defendant then rolled the victim over and pounded his face with 15 to 20 heavy blows with the lead pipe, killing him. The jurisdiction defines first-degree murder as murder committed with premeditation and deliberation. All other murders are defined as second-degree murders. Why will the defendant be convicted of first-degree murder as opposed to second-degree murder? Now, this question I found to be very easy because it's asking you, why will the defendant be convicted of first-degree murder? Right after telling us that the jurisdiction defines first-degree murder as murder committed with premeditation and deliberation. So we know that the answer that we're going to find, that's going to be the correct answer, is going to be one that has to do with premeditation and deliberation. Otherwise, we won't have first-degree murder. So let's start with answer choice A. Why will the defendant be convicted of first-degree murder as opposed to second-degree murder? Because of the relationship between the defendant and the victim requires that a finding of first-degree murder be made. That answer is incorrect. It has nothing to do with the relationship between the defendant and the victim. It has to do with premeditation and deliberation. Now, we can say that the relationship between the defendant and the victim is that the victim was always getting beat up by the defendant, but that doesn't have anything to do with premeditation or deliberation. So that answer is correct. Answer choice B, the degree of causative relationship between the defendant's acts and the death of the victim renders it murder in the first degree. So again, this is talking about relationship, and relationship has nothing to do with premeditation and deliberation. Again, this is designed to trick you. We know that the two of them have a rocky relationship. One is always beating up the other one, but that has nothing to do with the mental state. Relationship does not matter in this case. Answer choice C, the nature of the acts causing death distinguishes the defendant's action as first-degree murder. Well, we know that the act, this is focused on the acts causing the death, and that doesn't really equate to a finding of first-degree murder because we know that for first-degree murder, there must be premeditation and deliberation. That has to do with the mental state, not the actus reus. And then we get to answer choice D, which says the defendant's mental state up to and including the moment of the attack determines that the act is first-degree murder, which is correct. The defendant's mental state up to and including the moment of the attack. It shows you that the defendant was angry because this rival gang member had beaten him up twice before after school. So as a result, he obtained a heavy lead pipe and he waited in a deserted alleyway, which he knew that the rival took as a route home every day after school. And when he saw the enemy walking down the alley, he leapt out behind him and smashed the pipe into his head, knocking him to the ground. This was premeditation and deliberation. It had to do with his mental state up to and including the moment of the attack, which which classified rather this act as a first-degree murder. That is why the answer choice is D, and none of the above answer choices were correct. Our last question. After learning that she was the sole